Oh, it's an honor to be back at Godspeak. Not last time I was here, we did a Comedy and Constitution here a couple years ago, 3 years ago, with Brad Stein. But before that, 5 years ago, right here in this room, I learned from Rob about an ecclesia. He said it a little fancier there. But as a country boy, I got you. Look, I graduated in that half of the class that made the top half possible, so you just have to forgive me for my 7th grade language. I learned a long time ago, Zig Ziglar taught me, you always speak at a 7th grade level because that way even the college professors can understand. But anyway, right here on this stage, Rob taught me about the ecclesia and how important that is. And we filmed it and we called it Biblical Citizenship in Modern America. And of course, Kirk Cameron and Charlie Kirk and David Barton, Tim Barton, all these folks, Rabbi Lappin, taught in that class. But it came out of Godspeak right here and it went out to the world. And over 1 million people have gone through that course now and learned to be biblical citizens. So thank you, Godspeak, for being such an important part of that. What Rob was just talking about is exactly what we're going to be talking about today, making disciples. You know, there's a lot of people that get really nervous when you start talking, quote unquote, politics. I always say, don't bring politics into the pulpit. We just preach the gospel here. And so I always ask them to define their terms. First of all, what is politics? I mean, I served as a legislator. I voted on a lot of bills, wrote a lot of bills, passed a lot of stuff. Every bill I ever dealt with was very simply, how do you treat your neighbor? That's what politics is. It's how are we going to treat our neighbors? What's our community going to look like? What's our society going to look like? What's going to be legal and not legal? What do we do when somebody violates that? How do we treat our neighbors? Well, I kind of like the idea of living in a community where people treat their neighbors the way they want to be treated. I think that's written down somewhere. I kind of like the idea of living in a neighborhood where people actually think murder's wrong. I kind of like to live in a neighborhood where people think stealing's wrong and that there's no $900 exception to the 8th commandment. It would kind of be nice if everybody in the neighborhood was teaching their children to honor their father and mother, right? I mean, these are basic Christian principles, basic Judeo-Christian values that when infused into the culture, create a good environment and a good neighborhood. This is why even non-Christians in the founding era, very few of the founding fathers, by the way, were non-Christians. So you got a handful, about 8 to 10 guys, chief among them Thomas Paine and Benjamin Franklin. But even a Benjamin Franklin, who was essentially the Elon Musk of the founding era, Elon Musk now calls himself a cultural Christian. What that means is he may not profess Christ, but like Ben Franklin, he says, you Christians, you sure make good neighbors. I'd much rather live in a neighborhood where you're the prevailing force than those who do not believe in right and wrong, that actually believe they can do whatever feels good, whatever's right in their own eyes. That does not lead to a good society. It actually ends up leading to tyranny. Some people think liberty, if freedom and liberty means I get to do whatever I want, I get to do whatever's right in my own eyes, nobody can ever tell me something is wrong. They think that's freedom. That actually leads to complete chaos. It leads to the civil unrest that we see in most of our big blue cities around the country. And ultimately, then because of the craziness, people start begging for a dictator that'll just stop the chaos. And that's why it ends up leading to tyranny. So if you live out your liberty respecting the authority of where that liberty came from, you actually get to have the best of the best. And my mentor Zig Ziglar always said that God's best blessings are found within his boundaries. In other words, if you're living out your liberty within God's rules, respecting the authority of the laws of nature and nature's God, you get the best results. And so as a nation, America started that way. We started off saying that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their, no, it says Congress, doesn't it? You're not endowed by Congress with you're endowed by God? Why, you bunch of Christian nationalists. There's probably some other nasty names we could call you. I mean, I always wondered what this really scary phrase was, Christian nationalist. I mean, it sounds like, you want a theocracy or something weird like that. And I always wondered about it. And then finally, this lady on CNN, she explained it to us. She said, these people actually think that their freedom comes from God. I think Thomas Jefferson would like to have a word with this woman, because he actually penned those words. We're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. What's he saying? He's saying our freedom comes from God, and the whole reason we have government in the first place is to protect that freedom that God gave us, not government. If government's your source of freedom, government can take it away. If I'm your source of freedom, I can take it away. You are not the source of my freedom. I am not the source of your freedom. But we have to also recognize that if God's the source, then we must live this out respecting his authority. And that's how you get a good society. That's how you get a place where people want to live. There's a reason that people come to America. Have you ever noticed that nobody's digging tunnels to get into North Korea? There's no North Korean dream, let me just tell you. Okay, there's no Cuban dream. Why do we call it the American dream? Everybody wants it because it works. The principles of liberty actually produce good results. Now, in my simple mind, it's garbage in, garbage out. Good stuff in, good stuff out. If we put good stuff into the culture, good principles into the culture, then we get prosperity and liberty and all the things that everybody says that they want, but we have to back up and say, okay, well, how do we get there? If we want to make America great again, what made America great in the first place? Now, you may have been unfortunate enough to have attended one of our indoctrination camps in America, known as a college campus. And if you did, you might have been taught America's evil and terrible and the source of all bad things. I mean, we even have U.S. senators telling everybody that America invented slavery. Now, I don't know if you remember this guy named Joseph, but he was sold by his brothers into slavery, and I think it was a little bit before 1776, right? There was this other dude named Moses, led the children of Israel out of Egypt, a little bit before 1776, all right? Condition of mankind, depravity of the heart. Every nation on the planet in 1776 had slavery. What, this senator from Virginia forgets is that America was the second nation on the planet to ban slavery. We were our second nation on the planet to ban the slave trade. We had 600,000 of our own casualties to end slavery completely, and we actually led the world in this. We weren't drug across the finish line. We were leading the world in this. Guys like Jefferson, even among them, a slave owner himself, trying to get rid of slavery throughout his political career. So there's so much about our history that we just don't know. And if we want our nation to be great again, if we want to hand our nation in freedom to our children and grandchildren, it's time for us to accept the responsibility to do this well, to study these things, to be ready to answer on these things, and then pass that torch intact to our children and our grandchildren. I've lost I forgot. It's in my pocket. Never mind. I got it. It's all good. I knew there was a clicker here somewhere. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to offer you, can you guys restart that all the way back at the beginning? Is that the beginning? That's it. That's all the slides you're going to get right there. That beautiful, okay. Here we go. Okay, so in January, we're going to dive a lot deeper into this. Today, I'm just going to give you a 30,000 feet view. I'm going to fly through this thing. David Barton and I both get accused of talking 90 words a minute with gust up to 350. I'm just going to start at 350 and stay there for the rest of the morning. So buckle up. We're going to go as quick as we can. But if you come take the class, starting January 13th, we're going to have a 4-week class called Rebuilding Liberty. And you can take a picture of that QR code or right out front at the table, grab one of these little flyers, and you can sign up at home. For 4 Tuesdays in a row, starting January 13th, we'll be studying right here on Rebuilding Liberty. Now, this is kind of a follow-up course to the course that we filmed right here when Rob was teaching me about the ecclesia. And that biblical citizenship class that we filmed here, over 1 million people have been through that. Godspeak has blessed the world with a biblical understanding of what it means to be a good citizen. And we had about 1 million people go through that one. We want 4 million to go through Rebuilding Liberty before the end of the 250th. If you're not familiar with the 250th, we're going to celebrate July 4th, 2026, the 250th birthday of our nation, 250th birthday of the Declaration of Independence. And so for a full year after July 4th, we're going to keep doing that celebration. The president's going to be working with us to do all these things around the country. It's going to be awesome. But we have roughly a year and a half of celebration starting today. So if we're working from now until July 4th, 2027, we have a chance to actually rebuild liberty in this country. And you're going to get a chance to dive deep in that with that course. Scarlett's going to be hosting it. You guys had one of the biggest biblical citizenship classes in the country right here at Godspeak, and we're hoping you do the same thing with Rebuilding Liberty. So looking forward to you being a part of that. When we did biblical citizenship, as Rob was saying in the video, it was one of the things we partnered with Turning Point on in launching Turning Point Faith and getting churches to do this. The whole idea was to say, look, we're not going to ignore such a huge part of our life. We're not going to pretend that the Bible has nothing to say about leadership. or about what the laws should be in our culture, or about how we should handle all of these different things that are happening in our country. And it basically was a way of saying, we're not going to buy into this idea that the Bible doesn't apply to certain things. It was a way of saying, actually, the Bible applies to everything. I doubt anyone in this church has ever driven away from the church on a Sunday afternoon after attending services, and on the way home, you're driving home, and you're going, man, that was a really good sermon on how to be a good husband, good father, good wife, good mother. I wish we could use it when we get home, but, separation of home and church. You've never done that, have you? You've probably never driven away from here going, what a great sermon on how to be a good employee and have good work ethic and how to serve or how to be a good employer and how to create a good environment and honoring God and all these things. Wish we could use it on Monday morning, but, separation of work and church. You've never done that. Why do we allow ourselves to buy this lie of separation of church and state that somehow means the Bible doesn't apply to how our state operates? It's a complete lie. The Bible teaches all kinds of things about economics. There's actually a parable against the minimum wage. There's so much in the Bible about how we should operate as a society, and we used to believe that should really dictate how our society worked, and we started the nation that way. That's why the Declaration is so important when it says we owe these truths to be self-evident. What truths is it talking about? Actual truth, believing that there's a right and a wrong, and there's a best way to do things, and God's way is not only right, it works best. When we do things the way that God designed us to work under the laws of nature and nature's God, we get better results. You know that when we give money to government to take care of the poor, only 30% of every dollar we give them to take care of the poor actually gets to anyone in need. When we give to the church or to private organizations, 60% gets to the person in need. So you're twice as effective when you do it God's way versus when you do it our new way, right? There's nothing in the Bible that says government's supposed to take care of the poor. It doesn't work. Whenever we take care of the poor, then it's a personal relationship that happens, and we're able to actually teach them to fish instead of just doling out checks and pretending that that's going to solve the problem. That's just one example of so many. When we do it God's way, it actually works best. And that's what we mean when we say biblical citizens. Now, the opportunity to do this is unlike anything. I've been doing this 30 years. I have never seen a hungry populace like I see right now. I've never seen young people coming out of the woodwork saying, here am I, Lord, send me. Teach me how to speak. Teach me how to be ready to answer. 1 Peter 3:15, to be ready to answer for the hope that is within. These kids, and not just the kids, but every single one of us ought to be saying, you know what? I want to find my voice. I want to be a vessel for the voice of truth. People say that they were trying to silence Charlie's voice. They were really trying to silence the voice of truth. And Charlie was just a very effective vessel. And he was not some savant that'll never be replaced. Rob and I both said this on the Friday night on Flashpoint after Charlie was assassinated, that somebody said something about there'll never be another Charlie Kirk. We both said, no, that's wrong. Elijah passed the mantle with a double portion to Elisha. There's going to be thousands of Charlie Kirks that stand up and use their voice. Everyone in this room can be a Charlie Kirk that uses your voice, your vessel, as a way to amplify the voice of truth in whatever your realm of influence, whether it's 5 million people or 5 people, whether you're a mechanic and you're talking to the other guy that's working with you, and all of a sudden they ask a question in an important moment for their life about the Creator, or about Jesus, or about even just life and a marriage, or any of these other tough issues. And you need to be ready to answer to that person that's in your life. Or if you're a teacher and you have students that are willing to listen to you, or just as a family member, you've got people in your family that are hungry for truth. Are you ready to answer? Are you ready to live out 1 Peter 3:15? And the way to get there is to study to show yourself approved, like in Timothy. And that's why we want to encourage you to take these courses like Biblical Citizenship and Rebuilding Liberty and actually start applying the Bible to everything in life. There's I think the inflection point that we're in right now, it's certainly never happened in my lifetime. May not happen for another 50 years or 100 years. And some of you may be saying, Rick, why do you care about all this so much? Jesus is coming back next week, or maybe you've got a particular date that you've decided. I tend to believe what the Bible says, that no man knows the day. And you might say, well, yeah, but we kind of know the season. How long's the season? Look, I hope Jesus comes back tomorrow and messes up all my plans, okay? But if he doesn't, and he doesn't come back for another 100 years or another 1,000 years, I want to make sure I was a good steward on my watch and that I handed to my children and grandchildren a free nation. I want to make sure that they are able to gather and worship and study and teach and speak freely. I want to fight for these things so that my kids and grandkids can have the ability to live out their faith. That's why we do these things. It's a stewardship issue. Whether you like it or not, you have been placed in a free nation. Whether you like it or not, you are the king. You're the king. We, the people, are the king in America. So you're in charge, and not only do you have a voice, not only should you be using your vessel to speak truth, if you don't do that, I'm really going to get in your kitchen for a second here, so get ready. If you don't do that, you're the servant that buried the talent. So the other two servants multiplied the talent, worked the talent, risked the talent, multiplied it, and were told they were good and faithful servants. What did the servant that buried the talent get called? Wicked and slothful servant. You have been given the talent of freedom. You have been given the talent and responsibility of stewarding your government at the local level, county, state, federal level. In this nation, we have that not just freedom, but we have that responsibility. And, for whatever reason, God's plan was very different than my plan, and he used Charlie's life and Charlie's death to prepare a nation to be discipled, to be taught. And there is now this harvest that is absolutely amazing. And the harvest is plenty and the workers are few. And we have to make sure that we are purposely not making the mistake of previous revivals in America, where we had a great conversion and a great revival, but we did not disciple to the point of seeing a difference in the community. See, it's not just when they walk the aisle or they walk the beach. They have to then be discipled so that their actions are different and the world looks different as a result of that. That's a true great awakening when that happens. And we have an opportunity for that. I believe it's happening. But we have to make sure that we're, just as Rob said, discipling, not just having conversions. And that's what biblical citizenship's all about. That's what rebuilding liberty is all about. That's what Charlie's life was all about. Some people say Charlie was just talking politics all the time. Well, if you watch videos of Charlie, and to the untrained ear, yeah, he's just talking politics. But if you're a disciple of Christ and you read the Bible and you're saturated in God's word, then every time he was answering those questions, he was discipling. He was giving a biblical answer for whatever the question was. And because he had a true biblical worldview, which means God's laws apply to everything, no question was off the table. You could ask him about sexuality. You could ask him about taxes, property rights. You name the issue, nothing was off the table. And every time he would give a biblical answer, didn't always quote chapter and verse, but you go look at the answer, it was a biblical position on that particular question that was being asked. That's really discipleship, and that's what we have to do. I want to tell you this morning about a couple of other people that were like Charlie Kirk and the impact that they had on our nation in order to get you to be thinking about young people in your life that you can disciple. Because part of what and I could read all of Psalm 78, but Psalm 78 is essentially, don't make the mistake of our forefathers who did not disciple the next generation and teach them about God's great works. Instead, disciple them, teach them why they have hope, and teach them how to communicate it. Charlie was great at that, but I think we've got to raise up a generation like that. And I want to give you a couple of examples from the founding era. The guy that was probably most like Charlie in the founding era was a guy named Dr. Joseph Warren. If you're not familiar with Warren, he was actually the greatest orator of the Revolution. He would have been known as that had he not been killed by the British just a few weeks after he gave this speech right here. He was cut down early in life, 34 when he died, 33 when he gave this speech just a few weeks before they killed him. And very much like Charlie, he was really good at articulating why you should join the cause or why you should take a particular position. And he had given the address on the anniversary of the Boston Massacre one other time, and then this time in 1775. Every year on the anniversary of the Boston Massacre, they'd have this big rally at the Old South Meeting House. And everybody come together, somebody give a rip-roaring speech, and everybody talk about how they needed to get more involved and do more. One of those years, they got a little bit super excited and went down the road and had a little tea party. That was right after that speech at the Old South Meeting House. But this particular year, it's 1775, and we're already, we're coming really close to breaking out in war. Lexington will happen just a few weeks after this speech, and then Dr. Warren will be killed a few weeks after that at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And the British hated him so much If you think about the vitriol that the left loves to spew at Christians right now, I can't even repeat publicly some of the things that are being said right now about us at Patriot Academy. I mean, they're literally saying, build a wall around Patriot Academy's campus and burn it down and kill everybody inside. They're calling us everything you can think of, Nazi, fascist. We're the exact opposite of all those things, but they're calling us all of those things because they love to spew that hatred. They were the same way about Dr. Warren. They literally dug up his body a few days after they killed him at the Battle of Bunker Hill and desecrated his body. That's how much they hated him. Okay, so this stuff is real. The hatred that gets spewed leads to violence and hatred, no doubt about it. And they did that even back then. But here's what Warren said in his address on the anniversary of the Boston Massacre. And as I read these last couple of lines, and actually there's a line you might recognize if you're a Ronald Reagan fan. You're former governor here in California, and I think we need another Ronald Reagan type governor in California. I'm just thinking that would be kind of nice. I'm thinking Governor Rob McCoy sounds nice. I think that would be quite cool. Anyway, here's what he said, and Reagan quoted from this speech. So 1775. War's just about to break out, and Dr. Warren gives this speech. And listen to these words, and think about Reagan saying these words in his inaugural address in 1981, and then think about now, today, how much this applies. Our country is in danger, but not to be despaired of. Our enemies are numerous and powerful, but we have many friends determining to be free, and heaven and earth will aid the resolution. On you depend the fortunes of America. You are to decide the important question on which rests the happiness and liberty of millions yet unborn. Act worthy of yourselves. I can still hear Reagan saying that in 81. I think it applies today. We need to act worthy of what we've been given, the responsibility that we're to be stewarding. He closed out the speech with these words, and I think of Charlie when he says this, but I also think of you. And I think of what Godspeak represents and what you teach here and what has been exported around the world out of this church right here. He said, you then, who nobly have espoused your country's cause, who generously have sacrificed wealth and ease, who have forsaken the downy pillow to keep your vigils by the midnight lamp for the salvation of your invaded country. You then will reap that harvest of renown which you so justly have deserved. Your country shall pay her grateful tribute of applause, which I think is what's happened the last couple of months in paying the tribute of applause to Charlie for what he did. Even the children of your most inveterate enemies, ashamed to tell from whom they sprang, while they in secret curse their stupid, cruel parents, shall join the general voice of gratitude to those who broke the fetters which their fathers forged. Bunch of fancy words basically saying even the enemies of guys like Charlie and Rob and all the rest of us that are out here speaking these truths, even our enemies' children will someday grasp these truths and be thankful for the fetters being broken and being destroyed. Having redeemed your country and secured the blessing to future generations, now think about it, Charlie is still discipling the generations. His videos now are being seen by 1,000 times more people after his death than even in his life. And every one of those videos are discipling people to live biblical Christian virtues. So listen to these words by Dr. Joseph Warren over 200 years ago. Who fired by your example shall emulate your virtues. There's a generation right now that has been fired up by the example and are now emulating those virtues. And learn from you the heavenly art of making millions happy with heartfelt joy, which transports all your own, you cry, the glorious work is done. Then drop the mantle to some young Elisha and take your seats with kindred spirits in your native skies. That's 250 years ago. Those words apply today. And actually he was 33 when he gave the speech. He died a few weeks later at 34. Jefferson was 33 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. So God uses young people to have a huge impact on the culture if we train them in that way and with those expectations. And Jefferson, if you think about what he gave us in the Declaration of Independence, if we want to make America great again, here's the principles that made America great in the first place. When he said we hold these truths to be self-evident, he meant there are truths, there are right and wrong, like we were talking about earlier, and that then when we recognize that and we recognize that these freedoms that we want to build the nation around were given by God, then we must live out those freedoms, respecting his authority. And then he said government is designed and created for the very purpose of protecting those things. But then he said something that I think better describes the moment we're in right now, this moment in history. Like if we were to compare our moment today in American history to some moment in the past in American history, I would say we're in kind of a 1784, 85 time frame where we've won the big battles in a way, but now we've got to do the hard work of actually rebuilding the walls. More of a Nehemiah situation where we're rebuilding liberty in this country. And remember, Nehemiah, I mean, it took a while. He was with the king for 10 years before he actually convinced the king to let him go rebuild the walls. I've been with David Barton for 25 years, and I thought all these years, I mean, our organization is called Wall Builders, and it's from that scripture in Nehemiah, rise and rebuild the walls that we may no longer be a reproach. I thought we were rebuilding the walls for the last 25 years. Nope. We were just convincing the king to let us go rebuild the walls. So we spent all this time convincing the American people, don't you see the foundation is crumbling? Don't you see that the walls are in disrepair? Don't you see that we need to do this? And it took that long to now finally have the American people, all in God's timing, but now they're ready to rebuild. Now they're asking, how do I do this? What can I do? How do I use my voice? And so that next line in the Declaration says this, and I think it fits where we are with everybody being hungry to rebuild. He said that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends. Now, what does he mean, these ends? He just listed them in those 56 precious words in the heart of the Declaration. These ends are truth. So when any form of government becomes destructive of truth. Life, when any form of government, local, county, state, federal, becomes destructive of life. Liberty, pursuit of happiness. Do you have any form of government right now that is becoming destructive of the pursuit of happiness? If you have to go ask permission to add a room to your house for your mother-in-law, government is becoming destructive of your pursuit of happiness. Okay? If you have to ask government's permission to practice your trade, government is becoming destructive of the pursuit of happiness. Now, I know I'm getting into some economic issues here, but they are all tied to this idea that government's job is to protect your freedom, not violate and become destructive of your pursuit of happiness or your life or your liberty. Even consent of the governed. So it says right there in the Declaration that the purpose of government is to protect these things, and the government's only just powers come from the consent of the governed. That's elections, that's calling your legislator or your city council member, that's going and testifying and doing all those things. If government starts preventing you from being able to give or refuse consent, either by not allowing testimony or by doing things in secret or by manipulating elections, whatever it might be, it's becoming destructive of these ends. So there's so many of the ends that government has become destructive of. So what did Jefferson say we're to do? That when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Now, I'm not suggesting we abolish all government at all. I think government is a God-created institution. I think government's a blessing when it's in its lane. When it gets outside of its lane, it's a curse. So if we keep it in its lane, which it's our job to do so, and how do we get it back in its lane? We alter or abolish. So we alter government back to the way it was designed to work, and we abolish, we trim out those things that were never part of what government should be doing in the first place. Perfect example. Anybody think it'd be a good idea for us to abolish the Federal Department of Education? Probably a good idea, right? It's useless. It doesn't educate a single child. It wastes $300 billion a year. It's crazy. And we don't need a federal Department of Education. We've got a state Department of Education in all 50 states. The founders were very clear about don't do the duplicity thing. If you're doing it at the state level, don't do it at the federal level. There are certain things only the feds should do. Like the answer to the question, who decides, is what should be asked in every policy. And there's times when the federal government should decide. If we're going to go to war, that should be Congress's decision. Okay? There's certain things listed in the Constitution specifically given to the feds. But most things, frankly, almost everything. There's only 17 things the feds are supposed to do. Everything else is left to the states and the people. So we need to be abolishing these departments at the federal level and at the local level that we don't need and that we would actually thrive better doing on our own. We got to stop buying this safetyism, this lie that somehow we need government to constantly save us. The whole reason we fell into the COVID cult and started worshiping Pope Fauci is because of safetyism. Because we became convinced we had to play it safe and that hopefully government would protect us from everything. I'm telling you, safetyism is one of the worst things. It's killing the American dream. I remember driving by this lumberyard, and they had this sign that said, and I worked in a lumberyard in high school, so I drive by this lumberyard, and the sign said, "Safety is our highest value." I had to pull over and throw up. And the reason I was so upset is because this safetyism thing, I drove by that just a few weeks after in Uvalde, Texas, 100 police officers with their bulletproof vests and their ballistic shields cowered in the hallway while a maniac was murdering children on the other side of the door. They played it safe because the commander wanted to play it safe instead of, and thinking safety was somehow a virtue. It's not. And I'm not saying be stupid, but the idea that we're not going to risk, that we're not going to take chances, there's nothing about the American dream that happened because we played it safe. In fact, speaking of Ronald Reagan, what did he say the night the space shuttle exploded in 1986? He goes on television, he says, "I'm speaking to the school children of America. You may be wondering why we took a chance, why we were willing to risk these lives." He said, "The future does not belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. We won't be the land of the free if we're not the home of the brave." So we got to get away from this safetyism thing. In fact, I think we need to be doing the exact opposite. After the insanity of the COVID cult, we finally sued the governor of Nevada to be able to do our constitutional defense courses. We do this course called Constitutional Defense where we teach handgun defense training during the day and Constitution training at night. It's a great time. You got to come to Texas and go through that course. But we were doing that course in Nevada, and every month we'd take 300 people out there. And of course, the governor shut everything down. Finally, we had to sue him to be able to have our class because he had said, "You can do your class, but everybody's outside in 113-degree weather and they have to wear masks. And you have to stay 6 feet apart." Now, if you're teaching somebody that's never touched a gun in their life how to use a gun, you don't want to be 6 feet away. You want to be right on top of them, okay? Anyway, so we sue this guy, and we win, and we were able to have the class, and we go out there, and nobody's been together for 5 months. I mean, everybody's coming in the classroom. They're literally crying and hugging, and I mean, it was a wonderful super spreader event. And super spreader of freedom. What are you thinking? Anyway, so we have this great event. Everybody has a great time. 300 people. We finish the class. Everybody's headed home. Well, my boys, I raised boys to be a little bit ornery, and they refused to fly because they wouldn't wear a face diaper. So they were driving 25 hours back to Texas. So they're starting the drive back to Texas, and I'm flying out here to California to do mission work behind enemy lines, And so I'm coming out here to do a Constitution class. And so I'm getting on the plane and I'm texting my boys. And you know how when you split up with family and when you've been traveling together or whatever, you always say, "Be safe, safe travels." And so my boys are headed out, going on a 25-hour drive. So I'm like, "Be safe." And then before I hit send, I'm looking at it. I'm like, 5 months of everybody cowering in their homes and shutting down the world. And I said, I'm sick and tired of playing it safe. I'm like, delete, 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 delete. Be dangerous. Yeah. I said, be dangerous to the enemy, dangerous to apathy, and an absolutely existential threat to tyranny, sin. So be dangerous. Don't play it safe. I said that to a buddy of mine. He's like, "Dude, we got to make a shirt." so you can get that shirt at patriotacademy.com. There's my commercial for the day. Now, I'm not saying be stupid. I'm not saying be foolish. I'm saying be the terror to the terrorist. Be the defender of the defenseless. Be willing to risk a little bit. Put some elbow grease in. That's what made the American dream happen in the first place. So anyway, we're going to have to do that if we're going to save this thing. Another young lady, and thank you, Jefferson, at 33 years old, writing the Declaration of Independence. Another 33-year-old, Catherine Lee Bates. She writes America the Beautiful at 33 years old. I just want to point out 4 quick things out of the song. We sing it all the time. It's the most popular song in American history. It was actually written as a poem. I would argue today that it's a prayer if you really listen to the words of it. But she said, "God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea." You know, William Wilberforce, when he worked so hard all his life to end slavery, ban the slave trade in England. He talked about this. If you've never seen the movie Amazing Grace, go watch it. But he talks about this. He said, God gave me two great responsibilities. One, to end the slave trade, and two, a restoration of morals. He said, we have to make being good fashionable again. Make being good fashionable again. We attribute the quote to de Tocqueville. It's not in his writing, so I don't know where it actually came from, but this quote about America is great because America is good, and if we ever cease to be good, we'll cease to be great. We got to make being good fashionable again. So crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. America, America, God mend thine every flaw. Confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. This goes back to what I was saying earlier. God's best blessings are found within his boundaries. We need the law. We need to make sure that we have liberty in law, not chaos and everybody doing whatever feels good. Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife. This is not easy. It's tough to live in freedom. See, we're spoiled because other people paid the price for us to be free. And so we've gotten so used to living in freedom, we just think we deserve it. And we don't realize most people who ever lived on the planet did not enjoy these freedoms that we take for granted. And it takes some strife. It takes some hard work. And you have to actually love the country more than you love yourself. More than self, country loved, and mercy more than life. How many of you think we've got too many politicians that love self more than country? Right? If you're a patriot, you're not like a politician. A politician is thinking only about the next election. A patriot is thinking about the next generation. So when you're a patriot and it's time to vote, you're not going, oh, well, I get reelected if I do this. You're going, oh, this is the right thing to do. I don't care if I get reelected or not. I'm going to do the right thing for the next generation. We got to raise up more patriots like that will serve in a way where they love country more than self. Oh, beautiful for patriot dream that sees beyond the years. I love that line. That means you're looking beyond yourself. That means you're looking for posterity. How do I fight for this thing and preserve this thing that leaves it intact for the next generation? 33 years old when she wrote it. Reagan warned us about where we are right now. He said, if we forget what we did, we won't know who we are. I'm warning of an eradication of the American memory that will lead to an erosion of the American spirit. He was basically exiting stage left at this point. This was January of '89 when he's given his farewell address. And he's saying, I see a problem. I see that we've forgotten our history and we forgot what made America great in the first place. And I'm afraid it's going to erode our American spirit and will no longer be patriotic. And that's essentially what happened. As I said, we got soft. We enjoyed freedom too easily. In fact, you've probably seen this meme. Tough times make tough men make good times make soft men lead you back into tough times. And that's just the nature of man. That's why normally a nation crumbles at 250 years. Usually you're not celebrating your 250th birthday. You're grieving because your nation has fallen apart. So we're kind of on the precipice. We can go either way. We're literally at a point where it could go either way depending on what we do with this inflection point and this moment. I think we had just enough of the tough times over the last few years that people started saying, we could lose this thing. We could actually lose our freedom. I mean, you look at what's happening in Europe right now. How many people are going to jail for putting something on social media? Going to jail for thinking things, going to jail for sharing the gospel, or even just having a conversation with someone. It's crazy what's happening around the world, and if you don't think it can happen here, you're being naive. It absolutely can. So how do we prevent it? How do we rebuild liberty in this moment that we have, this inflection point in history? Well, Reagan told us. He said, let's start with some basics, more attention to American history, and a greater emphasis on civic ritual. Now, what does that mean, civic ritual? Well, if we only had some big date coming up that would be like an anniversary for something important, maybe like the 250th anniversary of something important. If only we had a document that talked about the biblical principles of liberty. Things like truths and life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, consent of the governed, alternate. Yeah, we got a great opportunity for civic ritual. Right now, as I said, until July 4th, 2027, we've got civic ritual right in front of us. So what do we do with it? How do we take this moment and say, okay, let's pause and let's spend a little time studying to show ourselves approved and studying the biblical perspective of how a society ought to work and how our nation, where we've been planted, actually works under our declaration and our Constitution. It's a tremendous opportunity to do exactly what Ronald Reagan was talking about. And that's why we're encouraging you to take this Rebuilding Liberty course. I told you we had roughly 1 million people go through biblical citizenship, filmed right here, as I said, in your church. Our goal is to put 4 million through the new course called Rebuilding Liberty, partly because it's a little shorter. It's only 4 weeks instead of 8, and it's only about an hour each video, and we're going to do that right here. Let me give you just a little teaser of what Rebuilding Liberty is going to be like. The purpose of this course is to make sure that they know why that flag is worthy of being waved.
Wherever you are watching from, we're not rebuilding a structure without giving the right foundation.
And our burden should be to transform a moment into a movement. The entire globe is moving towards the right.
Recommend this edition of the Bible to the inhabitants of the United States. I thought our founding fathers were a bunch of atheists, agnostics, and deists who wanted a secular public square, who didn't want the Bible in schools.
Fight like it's your last breath.
In order for us to truly understand history and understand our duty today, we have to look at really what it's built on.
What do I want my legacy to be on the way out? That I was safe or that I was dangerous?
Amen.
No, this nation is not perfect. I'll take America for any other country or nation on the face of this planet. How about you?
All right, you're going to enjoy it. I promise. Make sure you show up on January 13th. Get signed up. Use that QR code to get signed up. I'm going to give you 30,000 feet view real quick just so you have a little taste of what the bricks are that we're going to rebuild the walls with. If we're going to rebuild the walls effectively, we got to know the right bricks and we got to know the mortar, the right mindset for how we're going to do this thing so that it lasts for generations. I already talked about truth. That's the fundamental brick we got to start with. David Barton actually right here on this stage taught about the importance of truth and loving truth. That's actually a picture from that class in biblical citizenship where David was teaching in this room. And ironically, he talked about the fact that the reason the delusion gets sent by God is because we reject truth. We no longer love truth. And there's a real danger in America right now, not just from the left, but even from some of our conservatives, where truth is being rejected and a delusion is literally being spread. We have people out there that are literally spreading lies about Pastor Rob, about Mikey, about Erica Kirk, about Turning Point, and it's unbelievable the evil that is being spread right now that is creating dissension within our own ranks, within our own movement. So we've got to stop that nonsense. We've got to actually love truth and stop getting to this. It's almost like this this love of being unique. Like I'm the only one that sees it this way. I'm the only one that's investigating or whatever the lies are that get spread. You got to reject that stuff and love truth itself. And I think part of the reason that we reject the actual truth and we love these delusions is because it fills our sense of pride that we have some sort of lock on this that nobody else has. Don't fall for that stuff. Be a lover of truth. Do not spread the lies, but instead reject those lies and be one of the ones that's bringing truth back into the equation and rebuilding the walls with that truth. Keeping God in the equation, man, that's an essential brick to be built with. And of course, God's mentioned 4 times in the declaration, so this is actually where we came from. The pursuit of happiness I already talked about. So getting back to the idea of loving the free enterprise system, loving the effort towards happiness. Notice it does not say, let me go back to that one. It does not say life, liberty, and the guarantee of happiness. It does not say, this is really important for Californians, life, liberty, and the redistribution of happiness. Okay? So it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I tell the kids at Patriot Academy all the time, I'm like, hey, you got to fall in love with failure. Okay, I'm really good at failure. I fail a lot, and I fail as often and as fast as I can, because that's going to get me to success. Stop being afraid of failing and stop believing that you're guaranteed success right out of the chute. Anybody that's been in business, you know it's an average of 7 or 8 times of failure before you get to the big success. So let's start teaching the kids the way that our founding fathers did it. You risk, you work hard, you learn from it, you get back up, you get off the mat, and you fight again. So it's pursuit of happiness. We've got we're working on another season of Chasing American Legends. If you have not seen Chasing American Legends, go to patriotacademy.com. It's a fun reality show to teach history. But my youngest son, Rhett, is going to really bring this to Generation Z. Watch this one real quick.
10 years ago, my parents filmed a reality TV show where they took my siblings and me around the country to learn about America and its legends.
What was so significant that happened in the first 3 days they were here?
Prayer, and the Bible
study. Yeah, I got it.
Now, yes, that is little baby Rhett in his high-pitched voice. You'd think as an 11-year-old I wouldn't have cared, but my parents didn't teach me through textbooks, but by going to battlefields, hearing stories from their descendants, reading documents that the legends themselves wrote.
We are walking in the footsteps of George Washington.
But now that I'm older, I'm seeing that my generation have a completely different point of view.
But do you love America?
Yes, I do.
I hate America.
A recent poll found that just 16% of Gen Z said that they are proud to live in the United States.
Burn, baby, burn! Burn, baby, burn!
It's blatantly clear that most of my generation haven't heard the incredible stories of the men and women that built this country. But I also know there are so many unsung heroes that I have yet to hear about. It's time to set out and tell the tales of these legends that are barely even mentioned.
All right, so just know the stories are incredible. You've got a chance to educate the young people in your life. By the way, I love that last clip there where my son Rhett is walking with John Amanchukwu, and Rhett looks like a hobbit compared to John Amanchukwu. I always tell everybody I identify as John Amanchukwu's biceps. So, and if you don't believe that I'm as muscular as Amanchukwu, you're a bigot. So it's my truth. I'm kidding. Okay, anyway, the point is we have all these great tools to be able to educate the next generation with. And I want to encourage you to continue the conversations with the young people in your life. You know, you might have had some kids go off to, college or whatever and come back and now they're blaming you for everything and talking about how America's evil. Don't shun them. Don't put them out. Find ways to go to lunch once in a while. Just have the conversations. Have civil discourse with them. And do the same thing that we teach all of our students at Patriot Academy. When you're involved in a debate, whether it's, one-on-one with somebody over lunch or it's in the legislature, on the microphones or whatever it might be, every time you have the opportunity to have civil discourse, which it's either civil discourse or civil war. We don't want civil war. We want civil discourse. But every time you have the opportunity to do that, go into that conversation with two things in mind. Number one, that if I'm wrong, I want to know. I'm not going to go into this thing arrogant thinking there's no way I'm wrong. I'm going to go into this thing, I want to be sharpened. I'm willing to put out what I believe and be challenged on that. And if I'm wrong, I want to know about it. I want to get better. I mean, you may not believe this, but I was wrong once. It was a long time ago. It was in the 80s, and I've corrected it. And now, no, look, I'm wrong all the time. I get bad data or whatever, and I get corrected. That's why I like having conversations and have the chance for civil discourse. So have that attitude. You'll be much more respectful in the civil discourse when you do this. And then secondly, always have a curiosity about why the other person believes what they believe. Like genuinely ask the questions. How did you come to that conclusion? What causes you to believe that? What's the evidence that you have for that? And when you take those two things into the conversation, it's much more likely that you're going to have a fruitful conversation. So you can use some of the tools that we're creating at Patriot Academy, but just look for ways to have that civil discourse. It's such an important brick for us to rebuild liberty with. Okay, consent, that's just being engaged. That's just you. If you want to help rebuild liberty, if you want to pass this on to our kids, you got to get engaged. You got to be willing to give or refuse consent, which means you're showing up at the legislature to testify or showing up at your school board. You're absolutely showing up to vote, never using the excuse, well, I'm not going to vote because, I will not vote for the lesser of two evils. Friends, there is none righteous, no, not one. You're always going to vote for the lesser of two evils. I have yet to find a candidate that I agree with 100% of the time. I don't even agree with myself 100% of the time. There's one person on the planet I agree with 100% of the time. You know who it is? My wife. Because she's right whether she's right or not. You know what I'm saying, men? Listen, the point is, don't use an excuse like, oh, there's just no good candidates or whatever. You might have to go into the ballot box, especially in California. You might have to go into the ballot box and say, okay, this person is 50% biblical, and the opponent is 20% biblical. I'm going to vote for the one that's 50%. Notice I didn't say Republican or Democrat. This isn't Republican or Democrat values. These are American values that are biblical values. Okay, so it's all about, is this person governing or taking positions that are biblical? And if they are, I'm going to vote for the one that's most biblical. And none of them are going to agree with you 100%. So go with the one that most is most biblical, and then work hard to have better candidates next time. But never, ever, ever use the excuse, I'm not voting because there's just no good candidates. You do the best you can with what you got, where you are, and then work hard to have better ones next time. But not just in the election. Again, your voice. Use your vessel to be the voice of truth in your community. Write those letters to the editor. Post on social media. Speak truth everywhere you get a chance. That's part of giving or refusing consent. It's your right. It is your duty. But you got to be dangerous. You got to be willing to not play it safe, but to actually be dangerous. Another brick we're going to build with is that alter abolish thing I was talking about earlier out of the Declaration. We got to get out of this mindset that just because government's done it this way for 50 years, that we need to keep doing it that way. We got to be willing to challenge the status quo and get back to those founding principles. We skip all that. Talked about civil discourse, making sure that we're actually speaking, that we're not, being silent because we're intimidated. I think one of my favorite videos that I've seen since Charlie was assassinated was this kid that put out a video, 16 years old, and he said, I have always been afraid to talk about my faith or talk about my conservative values. Never again. I am going to speak up and make sure that my voice is heard. I love that. We've got to make sure that we're engaging in that free speech. Don't have time to really go into this one, but it's a really important brick for us to be thinking about as we rebuild, and that is that our justice system has to get back to being a biblical justice system, not a social justice system. And the difference in that is that in a biblical justice system, we are always we're going to say there's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither rich nor poor. We're going to biblically say we're going to treat everybody the same in our court system. Social justice says we're going to treat you different depending on the color of your skin, depending on your religious affiliation, depending on your political affiliation, depending on whether you're wealthy or not. That's evil, that's wrong. We've done that throughout our history in different areas around the country. There's been a movement to go back to that over the last few years. It is wrong, it is evil, it is racist. Let's not go there. Let's get back to biblical justice so that we're all treated the same under the law. That's a really, really important part of rebuilding this thing correctly. And then the last one is patriotism. And that's just the willingness to say, you know what, I love the values of my country so much that I'm willing to give of my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor. Now, of course, the founders, when they did the Declaration, they had to give all of that. When they put their name on the Declaration of Independence, that wasn't like us, signing a petition to get a road built in our community or whatever it might be, or signing a petition to remove some nasty stuff from our schools. That was literally signing a petition that says, here I am, King George, come kill me. And you're literally saying, I'm going to put my name on this document, knowing that the most powerful nation on the planet is going to come hunt us down and kill us for being willing to commit treason, which is what they were doing. To be willing to do that, they had to know that these principles were worth fighting for and worth dying for. Now, I'm not asking you to do as much as the founders did, but I am asking you to do a little bit. So your life, your fortune, your sacred honor looks like this in the fight that we have today. Your life is your time. I'm going to ask you to give 2 hours a week of your time, that you'll commit to investing in freedom somehow, some way, whatever it is in your community, whatever God puts on your heart. For you, that might be attending the Rebuilding Liberty course here once a week. It might be hosting a class in your home. It might be working with your school board or your city council to get In God We Trust, the national motto, displayed, or getting the 10 Commandments back in the courthouse or in the schools. It might be that you're volunteering at the soup kitchen or somewhere in the community where you're investing in freedom. 2 hours a week is what I'm asking you to do. 2% of your fortune, actually investing 2%, just 2%, the other 98%, whatever, but 2%, you're going to invest back into the system of freedom that you've been blessed to have. That might be giving to a local candidate. It might be given to a candidate somewhere else in the country that you know is going to be great for biblical values. It might be given to Turning Point or to Patriot Academy or to Wall Builders or some other nonprofit out there that's doing a lot of this parachurch ministry, but looking for ways to invest in freedom. And then lastly, 2 times a week, put your sacred honor on the line. Now, sacred honor means your reputation. So for the Founding Fathers, when they pledged their lives, fortune, sacred honor, they're basically saying we're going to stand by these principles that are in this document. I'm asking you to do the same thing. And do that by posting on your social media some education that brings civic literacy back to our country. So share a post from Rob or from me or from David Barton or whoever that is teaching about the Declaration and about the Bible and how the biblical principles made America great. Now that's going to put your reputation on the line, Because once you share that on your social media, you're going to get some hateful comments. I can virtually guarantee it. But you're willing to do that because you're willing to give of your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor. Now, the last story I'm going to tell you about this, the last 33-year-old, so we've had a little bit of a theme here. So Charlie was 31. We get Dr. Joseph Warren was 33. Jefferson was 33 when he did the Declaration. Catherine Lee Bates was 33 when she did America the Beautiful. Joshua Chamberlain was 33 when this happened. 34 when this happened, so he's a year off from our theme here. But if you remember Joshua Chamberlain, if you ever saw the movie Gettysburg, he was the one that was at Little Round Top, guy from Maine, actually a school teacher that was serving in the Civil War, and we were about to lose the flank and ultimately lose Gettysburg and probably the war, and he actually, without any more ammo, they ran out of ammo, says fix bayonets, and they charged down the hill and turned back 2 full divisions. It was a miraculous moment. But here's what he said in that moment. It's really powerful. He said, when faced with the choice to do something or do nothing, I will always choose to do something. I had deep within me that day the inability to do nothing. I knew I may die that day, but I would not die with a bullet in my back. Joshua Chamberlain was willing to do something, even if it would have cost him his life. 34 years old at the time. I think probably the most powerful way to say this is the way Lincoln said it after Gettysburg. And let me share just a quick, this was something that one of our students wrote to me 2 days after Charlie was assassinated. She's 19 years old. Here's what she said. She said, I've been thinking all day about the words of Lincoln in his Gettysburg Address. He said, we are now engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, cannot consecrate, cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it. Far above our power, our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us. And this next line, I've always used this on Veterans Day anyway, and Veterans Day was just last week, is how Lincoln says we honor those who paid the ultimate price. So to all our veterans in the room, thank you for being willing to serve, willing to die for our freedom. To all of those who did die, yeah, amen. The way that we thank them is not just by our applause, not just by, I taught my kids, you always walk up to somebody in uniform and shake their hand and say thank you for your service. But the real way to thank them is what Lincoln said next. And I think this applies to the way that we thank Charlie for his service and his martyrdom. And if you don't believe Charlie was a Christian martyr, you didn't pay attention to what he was saying. He was killed for his faith. And in fact, Erica Kirk, 2 days after it, she described what he died for. She said he died for 3 things: patriotism, faith, and God's merciful love. That's the cause for which he died. So here's how Lincoln finished it. That from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, but the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. An increased devotion to the cause. Patriotism, God's merciful love, our faith. Can you take an increased devotion, at least over the next year and a half during the 250th, to make sure that this nation under God has a new birth of freedom as Lincoln described it? There's so much that we can do. When you take that Rebuilding Liberty course, we're going to give you a lot of different action steps. In fact, we call it a 12-step recovery program. Now, unlike your personal 12-step recovery program, you don't have to do all 12. You just got to do 1 or 2. But you got to do some of these steps. So be ready to take action on saving this country. Millions before us were willing to pay the price. They were willing to sacrifice so that we could sit here in freedom, so that we could worship this morning as we choose, so that we could raise our children as we choose, so that we can live out our faith. What are we willing to do? This is the hour that we've been called to stand guard at the Watchtower of Freedom. Are we willing to preserve it for future generations? The ultimate question is this. When we're done, when it's time for us to hang it up, are they going to say of us that on our watch, the torch of freedom was only dimly lit? God forbid they say of our generation that on our watch, the torch was extinguished. God's given us everything that we need, and he's opened the eyes of the youth. We have the chance now to mentor the next generation and teach them what freedom is all about. Let's do our part, and let's make sure that what they say of our generation is that on our watch, the torch of freedom burned even brighter than it ever had before. We can do that if we will follow God's commands and be good stewards of what he's given us. Let me close this in prayer, and then we'll sing one more song. Father, we just thank you for the opportunity to take action. We thank you for the fact that we get to live in freedom, and that you didn't place us in a dictatorship where we have no say in our government, but instead you placed us in a nation at a time where we can be good stewards and we can make a difference, that we can actually influence the world around us so that when we're salt and light, the meat is preserved and the darkness is dispelled. Thank you for putting us in that position. Now give us the courage and give us the wisdom to be men of Issachar so that we understand the times and we know what to do. Give us the courage and the wisdom to be students, to study to show ourselves approved, to be ready to give an answer for the hope that is within, and then to speak with all boldness every time one of those opportunities rise. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for Godspeak, for this church, for Pastor Rob, for Pastor Micah. I thank you for the influence they've had, not just here in this community, but throughout this state, across this nation, and around the world. I just pray you amplify their voice even more. In Jesus' name, amen.